A voice wondered where she was. After all, she was surrounded by endless darkness, unable to see anything in front of her. Gradually, voices started to echo from afar. Apparently, some noblewomen were gossiping about the way His Majesty had looked at the crown prince, saying it was spine-chilling to witness. One of them explained that no father would want to hurt his son. Since the prince was the future ruler of the Hubard Empire, the king had just given him a harsher than usual expression of love. The voice wondered if that's really what she had heard, because these people were saying weird stuff, like the names of empires. Another noblewoman added that either way, the prince had grown a lot since they last saw him. He already had the height of a grown man. She sighed, saying it was a shame Queen Elise wasn't around to see him like this. Hearing that sparked something in the main girl's memory. That's when it hit her. She was probably inside the world of a book she had just finished reading. She remembered her final moments. Getting hit by a truck while trying to save a cat. And yeah, that truck probably launched her into this world. Celebrating, she said goodbye to her pathetic old life. Maybe that cat she saved right before dying had given her a stroke of luck. Since she already knew the plot of the book, it didn't really matter which character she'd reincarnated as. Her success was guaranteed. She started wondering whose body she ended up in. Maybe a stylish villainess? Or an elegant daughter of some royal family? Being born into a rich family would definitely make things easier. But even being a countryside girl had its charm. She thought back to how hard her past life had been. So in this new life inside the novel, she was gonna live it up. Luxury style. While she was lost in all these thoughts, a boy appeared from behind some bushes. He reached out his hand and grabbed something. Confused, she suddenly noticed her body was lifting off the ground. Panicked, she tried to say something, but only a meow came out. Shocked by the sound that left her mouth, she had to face reality. She thought she'd be the protagonist, or maybe even the villain. She would have settled for a side character or background extra. But nope, not even human. As the boy stared at her, she realized she had turned into a tiny cat, smaller than the palm of a hand. Her hands were covered in soft white fur. Wait, she should probably call them front paws now. She remembered how, in her old world, cats were loved by everyone. But in this novel, things were very, very different. The book was called Souls Devoured by Darkness. She had read that tragic story on a friend's recommendation. The obsessive psychosis of the female lead toward the male protagonist was described in painful detail. It was the kind of thing that both captivated and haunted readers. Even so, she remembered rooting for them to end up together. And she also remembered all the lore. Hubert was the biggest empire on the Demeter continent. It was where Silian Gunther Reinhardt, the male lead, would become emperor. When the empire was founded, an old priest had made a prophecy. It said cursed cats would bring ruin to the empire. Because of that, villagers hunted those animals down. Scared citizens searched every corner of the land and wiped out every cat they could find. Centuries passed. Now, you wouldn't find a single whisker anywhere in the entire kingdom. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and the empire thrived in peace and prosperity. So, yeah, knowing all of that, of course she had to be reincarnated as a cat. In Hubard, kids were taught from a young age that cats were evil creatures and should be killed on sight. Now she was trembling in this boy's hand, totally convinced she was about to die. Just then, some soldiers came over, asking if something had happened to His Majesty. He calmly replied no and waved them off, saying he wasn't feeling well and they should go hunting some other day. They nodded and left. Still in the boy's grip, the little cat had zero doubts now. Looking at him, he matched the novel's description perfectly. In Hubard, only royals had red eyes. And among the royal family, only one guy could have inherited Queen Elise's iconic ebony hair. The insanely handsome young man who had caught her could only be one person. Silian Gunther Reinhardt, Crown Prince of the Hubard Empire. He was known in the novel as the bloodiest tyrant to ever exist. And now that he knew about the prophecy, it was obvious. As soon as he realized she was a cat, he was going to kill her. But that wasn't fair. She hadn't even been part of the destruction the cats were blamed for in the Empire. She was just a poor human who died trying to save a cat. She tried to somehow send that message to His Majesty, that inside this tiny cat body was actually the soul of a human. But, well, being a cat makes communication just a little too hard. Hearing the creature in his hand meowing nonstop, the prince wondered what it was trying to say. Thoughtfully, the young man pointed out that the animal was a cat. Well, yeah, kinda obvious. Frozen in place, the little cat realized that maybe he had never seen one before. He probably only knew cats from drawings and illustrations since they were supposed to be extinct in the Empire. She tried to explain she knew the future of the Empire and how it would fall. But no matter how hard she tried, she was still just a cat meowing like crazy. The prince kept staring at her, now with a darker look in his eyes. Suddenly, she felt herself land on something soft. She realized she was now inside the prince's pocket, wondering what the heck he was doing. Already inside the palace, she could hear footsteps and wondered where he might be headed. waiting anxiously without even seeing the world outside. Maybe instead of the garden or somewhere outdoors, he wanted to kill her somewhere else? A hand reached toward her and placed her on a table. He sat across from her while she feared her end had finally come. The prince said the creature looked a bit different from what books described. Its teeth didn't even reach past the chin, and the claws didn't seem scary at all. He wondered if it was just because she was still a kitten. The protagonist thought, what the hell did this world think cats were supposed to be like? As he poked at her, the prince added that, despite all that, the books did get one thing right. This creature was talented at hiding its evil nature behind cuteness to trick humans. He kept watching her shake nonstop as he stared her down. He said it made sense that people thought cats were adorable. That statement left the girl totally stunned. Silian stared thoughtfully at the little cat in front of him. Then he reached out his hand and asked her to give him a paw. So she did. Next, he told her to roll over and give him a high five. Finally, he asked her to bite his finger. That last one made her take a step back. Was he just looking for a reason to kill her? Hesitating, she walked toward his hand and bit him really gently, more like a kiss than a bite. Silian stared at his finger silently. Then he said it was kinda weird, because it really felt like this animal could understand everything he was saying, which made her the only living being who did. As the dinner table was set, the prince wondered what kind of food he should give this little thing in front of him. The kitten wondered why he was calling her this thing. Like, did he think she was some kind of object? Still, it seemed like he had decided not to kill her, for now, since he was thinking about feeding her instead. As he poured milk into a dish, the girl thought, considering she was supposedly the cat that would destroy the Empire, according to the prophecy, she was lucky to even be alive. Apparently, the prince looked to be around 18 or 19. In the novel, he got crowned right after becoming an adult. That's when the story started. So she figured she must have been dropped into the timeline before the novel actually began. He set the dish in front of her and told her to eat. Even though her stomach was growling, she remembered that cats can get stomach aches from drinking human-made milk. But in the end, she decided to drink it anyway. To her surprise, the milk tasted amazing. And tossing aside all human dignity, she started drinking like there was no tomorrow. Grabbing a napkin, the prince said that everyone claimed cats were smart and cruel, but this one in front of him looked more like a pitiful little mess. As he wiped her off, he pointed out that she was so fragile, he could probably break her by accident. The kitten wondered if that was supposed to be some kind of insult. As he stared at her, Silian questioned how something so tiny could possibly kill anyone. Nearly in tears, the protagonist thought, "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell you." Someone knocked on the door and called out to His Majesty, apologizing for the interruption. The prince hesitated for a second before the door opened. Then, he quickly grabbed the kitten and shoved her into his coat pocket. Stuffed into his jacket like that, she got that he had to act fast. But did he really need to be that rough? Ugh, the stupid prince. She heard someone ask if they had interrupted his meal. A young lady spoke to the prince, saying that since His Majesty had enjoyed the meal she prepared for him yesterday, she came to thank him in person. And so, the young woman with a jaw sharper than an isosceles triangle continued, saying she was worried about his lack of appetite, but happy to hear he'd eaten the meal she prepared. Listening from his pocket, the protagonist realized that a woman who insists on making meals reminded her of something from the novel. The young lady then asked the prince to enjoy the food again today, saying she really put in a lot of effort making it. Hearing that soft and delicate voice, the girl remembered there was only one person who would push so hard to feed Silian. Someone who'd do anything to satisfy her hunger for power. The evil countess, Catherine Harmon Gisela. In the original story, she seduced Silian's father, the emperor, and ended up sitting on the throne as the empress. Catherine asked the prince if he had lost his appetite again. This same woman, at only 20 years old, was gifted the entire state of Gisela by the emperor. The protagonist remembered how the main character had a hard time dealing with her because of her intelligence and influence. While the kitten got lost in her thoughts, Catherine kept talking, mentioning that today's meat was lamb seasoned with salt and pepper, served with a sauce made from premium wine from the Bordeaux region. That was only the beginning of her grand plan. After all, Gisela was using dark magic potions on the emperor. Trying to get Silian to eat, she said it was important not to let the meat get cold, or it would lose its flavor and turn rubbery. She then asked him to at least take a bite, since she had worked so hard on it. Catherine had done the same to the prince's food, and little by little, in the story, Silian would become poisoned by her potion, turning into a puppet she could control once he became emperor. She added that she felt bad about leaving him to eat alone, so she'd wait until he finished his meal before leaving. Annoyed, Silian asked if he ate what she brought. Would she finally leave him alone and stop this nonsense? Hesitating, Catherine explained that His Majesty had ordered her to make sure Silian was eating properly, so she was just following instructions. Realizing she was right, he sighed and gave in. Inside his pocket, the cat girl panicked, hoping he'd wait a second. Was he picking up the spoon now? She thought there was no way she could let the prince eat anything prepared by that woman. With no other choice, she went for her secret weapon, desperately scratching the prince's pocket. Silian felt something moving inside his coat and got startled. The countess asked what was wrong. The prince told her to wait a moment and reached into his pocket, grabbing the kitten. But she was determined to stop him from eating and kept scratching, trying to warn him the food was bad. And even though, in her mind, she pictured his brain melting and his life getting wrecked, the only sound she managed to make was a tiny, pathetic meow. When he pulled his hand out of the pocket, there was a huge scratch across it. The prince said he'd had enough of all this. He pointed out that his father wasn't the type to care about his eating habits, and besides, he wasn't even hungry right now. Trying to fake concern, Catherine said he probably wasn't feeling well, so she'd let him rest in peace. After hearing the door close, Silian turned toward his pocket. He quickly searched for the kitten with a serious look on his face. Now, sitting on the table, her head down, the prince asked if he could take a look at the scratches she gave him. The protagonist didn't know what to do. Just being a cat in this world was already weird enough. And now that she had scratched him during dinner, she was sure she wouldn't get away with it. She tried meowing in desperation, trying to explain herself. But in the end, she realized Silian couldn't understand her. A super awkward silence followed. The prince stared while the kitten shook in fear. Almost crying, she thought to herself, "Yep, I'm definitely gonna die." Under his gaze, she completely froze. She wondered if maybe she should have just let him eat and planned an escape later. But shaking her head, she told herself no. That wouldn't sit right with her conscience. There was no way she'd feel okay letting someone become addicted to something as awful as that cursed drug. If she wanted to stop that from happening, she couldn't let him eat anything made by Countess Gisela ever again. Then the prince gently patted her on the head and asked if she'd gotten scared being inside his pocket, saying that if he was going to keep her outside from now on, she better not scratch him like that again. The protagonist felt relief wash over her. Despite his terrifying expression, the prince was letting her off with just a warning, basically like getting a yellow card. Grabbing his fork, Silian said he was going to return to his meal. Panicking, the kitten tried to think of some way to stop him. Finally, she had an idea. Meowing loudly, she started clawing at the tablecloth, leaving the prince confused about what she was doing. Realizing she'd just made things even weirder and only made Silian uncomfortable, she wondered what to do next. In the end, she decided to risk everything and tried using the universal language of all animals, body language. She started gesturing, basically miming out the idea that if he ate the food, he'd die. Confused, the prince asked if the cat was trying to stop him from eating. Happy, the girl meowed affirmatively. Feeling like he was going insane listening to a cat, Silian asked what was even the reason to avoid this food in particular. All he got back were more random meows. Giving up, he figured maybe the kitten had sensed something. And based on her gestures, if he ate it, he'd get sick and pass out, which honestly sounded like poison. The prince said that made absolutely no sense. I mean, how could a cat possibly know something like that? The girl thought, because I'm a human inside a cat's body. She wondered what would have happened if she really was just a regular cat in this world, and not someone who reincarnated. If she was just a cat, how exactly would she survive here? Despite that grim thought, she tried to stay hopeful. First of all, she was super close to the crown prince, so getting killed right now was unlikely. In a little fantasy of hers, she imagined a future by the prince's side, but also thought of ways she might turn back into a human. She decided to use the full charm of this tiny cat body she was reborn into. Silian froze for a second, then smiled. The prince said, "This is kind of funny," and the kitten was stunned. He smiled. Then someone knocked on the door. They announced that a command from the emperor had arrived, asking for the prince's presence at the second library as soon as possible. Silian's entire vibe shifted. That cheerful smile was instantly replaced by a cold, dark expression. With the lights off, the kitten laid on the prince's bed, waiting in silence. She thought the room was super boring, like it had no personality at all. But then again, Silian spent most of his time at the academy, so it made sense that his room would be kinda lifeless. He barely stayed at the palace. Before he left, Silian told her not to leave the room, that she could use whatever was inside to keep herself busy. But that was it. Now, in the present, she waited, feeling down, thinking the prince had rushed off to see the emperor and left her behind. A little while later, Silian walked through the hallway and eventually returned to his room. Taking off his coat, his body revealed several scars, and then he went straight to the bath. With a blank, lifeless expression, he washed himself, his skin marked with blood, bruises, and fresh cuts. Drying his hair, he walked over to the bed and noticed the kitten was still there. Silian praised her for staying quiet as he gently petted her. Lying down, he said he was going to sleep now, so she should make sure to stay on the bed and not fall off. But then the kitten noticed something strange. The prince's scent had changed. She could smell blood. She remembered from the original story that the emperor used to discipline him brutally since he was a child. That might have been why he was summoned earlier. The girl thought to herself, honestly, I always wondered why male leads in romance and fantasy stories were so stoic. Probably just to make them look cooler. She used to think Silian's past was a big cliché. But now that she was actually witnessing it firsthand, it felt way harder to accept. Brushing it off as just part of the plot felt wrong now, because it was happening right in front of her, and right now, the smell of blood and the cold air were painfully real. She walked up to his hand, wondering if there was anything she could do. She just wanted to help him somehow. Silian shifted in his sleep, and suddenly woke up, thinking he had another nightmare. But then, something caught him off guard. Instead of the kitten sleeping next to him, he woke up to a full surprise. In his arms, lying in bed, was a silver-haired woman, completely naked. Shocked, the prince immediately sat up. He looked to the side and realized something was missing. The cat was gone, and in its place, now there was a woman lying on his bed. In his mind, he thought the kitten that was supposed to be there had just vanished. This had been his first time ever seeing a real cat, something he had only known from illustrations. Maybe killing it back then would have been the right choice. He remembered reaching for his sword, hesitating, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to do it. First off, how had a cat like that even existed if they were supposed to be extinct? And even more confusing, how had one ended up in the garden near the palace in this day and age? Second, he remembered that, even though she was an animal, when he had pet her, she clearly understood human language. And even looking so small and fragile, barely able to protect herself, the kitten still tried to stop the prince from eating the poisoned food. And on top of that, she'd waited quietly for him in his room, keeping him company until he fell asleep. So, this cat, no matter how dangerous these creatures were said to be, Silian had realized it. This cat belonged to him. Standing there, staring at the woman in his bed, he thought that if this woman dared to lay a hand on what was his, whoever she was, Silian wouldn't forgive her. Irritated, he shouted for the woman to wake up now, but only silence followed as she slept like a rock. Furious, Silian reached for her, and as the prince, he ordered her to open her eyes this very second. The woman slowly blinked awake, still half asleep. Then a flash of light burst out, momentarily blinding him. In the next instant, the kitten was back in his bed, rolling around and meowing at him. He stood frozen, completely stunned by whatever the hell he'd just witnessed. The kitten, on the other hand, was just yawning cutely. The protagonist wondered why he was waking up a cat in the middle of the night. Seeing his expression, she realized the prince was actually pissed. In her mind, she wondered if she'd maybe kicked him in her sleep, or accidentally touched one of his injuries. The prince paused for a moment, then asked the kitten who she really was. She looked at him for a second. The girl thought, even if he asks that, I'm still just a cat. I can't do more than meow. There was no way to give him a real answer. Still in disbelief, he kept trying to form a sentence, but stopped and restarted multiple times. His brain clearly unable to make sense of what just happened. That just confused her even more. Then Silian leaned in and asked if she was really a cat. She wondered if he had serious trust issues. And meowing in response, she mentally questioned if this was literally his first time seeing a cat. Feeling kinda bad for him, she realized, yeah, it really was. The kitten wondered if he was under the influence of the black magic potion. That stuff was supposed to build up in his body over time. Or maybe he was just delirious from stress and in some kind of sleep-talking trance. She remembered reading in the story about an antidote, but the only person who knew about it was Countess Gisela, and unfortunately, she took that info to the grave. So now the girl had absolutely no idea how to give the prince that antidote. Silian said that if she revealed her identity now, he'd go easy on her punishment later. Hearing that, the girl went full cat mode, scratching behind her ear, licking her fur, acting like she was just grooming herself. She figured that'd be enough to convince him. He'd probably think she was cute or something. But instead, Silian just looked at her, dead serious, and asked what the heck she was doing. Feeling that cold response, she realized her dignity was gone, and she hadn't even gotten anything out of it. Walking toward him, she thought if her kitten cuteness didn't work, maybe it was the potion messing with him after all. Climbing into his hand, she started licking him, hoping maybe it'd help purify the black magic inside him. Silian hesitated for a moment, then sighed and gave up. Throwing himself back into bed, he figured there was no point interrogating her anymore. He wasn't going to get any answers either way. Realizing he had given up, the girl plopped down on the bed too and figured she might as well go back to sleep. The prince tucked her in and gave her a few gentle pats. She wondered why he was wrapping her so tightly in the blanket, but then shrugged it off. Feeling sleepy again, she drifted off. A few seconds later, the same flash of light appeared again. Startled, the prince stared in shock. What the hell was happening? Right in front of his eyes, the kitten was transforming into a woman again. Silian thought about how cats were believed to be entities that would one day destroy the Hubard Empire if left unchecked. Because of that belief, the Empire had used countless resources to wipe them out completely. That's what he had been taught all his life. But right now, what he was seeing went beyond anything he could have imagined. Because the so-called cat sleeping in front of him was nothing more than a beautiful woman. He was torn, because even though a cat clearly still existed, the Empire was still standing, which completely contradicted everything he had been taught. And to make things even more confusing, there was nothing in any of the Empire's records about cats turning into humans. There had to be something off about this whole ancient prophecy, something that had fooled the entire Empire. In the end, the prince knew one thing for sure. The Empire would be his, no matter what. So he wouldn't stop until he uncovered every hidden mystery in Hubard. Sitting deep in thought, with the woman still lying beside him, Silian gently ran his hand through her hair. He thought, until that day comes, until the entire Empire belongs to him, he wouldn't let anyone find out about this cat or take it away from him. But more than that, embarrassed, sneaking glances at the sleeping girl, he thought they really needed to buy this woman some clothes. The next morning, with sunlight pouring in through the window, the kitten woke up. Now that she had truly become a cat, she thought she needed way more sleep than before. Looking around, she wondered where Silian had gone. Then suddenly, she noticed something. There was a piece of fabric tied around her back leg, keeping her stuck in place. As she wondered what the heck that was, the prince approached holding a plate. He said he couldn't just let her wander off whenever she felt like it. Smiling, he walked closer with a dish of milk. Setting it in front of her, Silian said she better eat while it was still warm, and not even think about going anywhere. Feeling a little down, she wondered how he could sound so cheerful while saying something that controlling. Sniffing the air, the kitten noticed the prince still smelled like blood. Looking concerned, she walked over to him, which confused him. She started tugging at the string on his shirt, and when she bit down and pulled, part of his outfit fell to the side, revealing his wounds. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked, grabbing her gently. Seeing all the scars, the protagonist was shocked at how bad it was. The prince was known as the Empire's top martial arts and swordsmanship master. So seeing these brutal injuries, she wondered why he never fought back. It was strange that the Emperor, praised for his strength in the original story, was now the one violently abusing his own son during childhood. The girl thought, sure, Silian was the tragic male lead, but that didn't mean he had to go through such a hostile and violent life. So finally, she walked up and meowed at him, then jumped onto him with her paws raised, looking a bit mad. Seeing this, the prince asked, "What are you doing now?" Then added, "Are you upset because I'm hurt? Is that what you're trying to say?" Looking at her, Silian smiled. He said it was weird that she acted like a person and yet still thought she was a cat. As he said it, he kept petting her in his lap. In his mind, he wondered, was she trying to trick him? Or did she really not know what she was? He said they needed to head out now. They had something to buy, which left the kitten totally clueless. Later, inside the carriage, she looked out the window and felt alive for the first time in ages. Finally seeing something other than the prince's room. She saw people walking around in their old-timey outfits, and it hit her. This really was the world of a novel. Suddenly, the prince pulled her back from the window, scolding her not to put her paws there. She reluctantly agreed with a small meow. The carriage stopped, and the coachman announced that they'd arrived at their destination. Two people greeted them, saying it was an honor to receive the prince, and proudly mentioned that this was the most popular clothing shop in all of Cloud City. Meanwhile, inside the prince's pocket, the kitten wondered why he'd bring her to a clothing shop. Did he need her for something? As they stepped inside, Silian noticed some masks on the counter. He asked what they were for, and a woman explained they were accessories for the upcoming palace masquerade ball. They were still being made, which is why they hadn't been placed in the window display yet. The girl figured the prince must be getting ready for that ball. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted her opinion as a woman. Silian said he'd walk around on his own for a bit to check everything out, and dismissed the staff. The attendant agreed and stepped away. Then the prince said the kitten could come out now. So she did, immediately. She was startled by the luxury of the clothes all around her. Everything looked insanely expensive. Then the prince told her to pick something she liked. For a moment, she was just confused. But then it hit her. The young man went on, saying he didn't really know what women usually liked. Meanwhile, the kitten was panicking inside. They were standing in the pajamas section. Why on earth did he want to buy someone pajamas? Silian said it was a gift, but that only left the protagonist even more confused. She wondered who this woman was that the prince might want to give a present to. Her thoughts wandered for a while, and she came to one horrifying conclusion. It might be Countess Gisela. the same one who had poisoned his food. She questioned if Silian really wanted to give cute clothes like those to the Countess. And yeah, she admitted that Gisela was stunningly beautiful. Like the kind of beauty that could make anyone fall in love at first sight. Plus, they were only 3 years apart in age. But still, she thought they were supposed to be enemies. The woman had taken her mother's place in the palace, so there was no way they were ever on good terms. She wondered if maybe he had fallen for her just because of the meals she cooked. Totally horrified, the protagonist panicked at the thought. The prince had no idea what kind of poison that woman was feeding him. While she was spiraling, Silian asked if this was enough, but the kitten started meowing like crazy again, trying once more to warn him that the Countess was using magical poison. But of course, he couldn't understand a thing. Silian asked if she didn't want to buy them, saying they needed those clothes. She shook her head violently, but the prince just laughed, teasing her. What, are you jealous? You thought those were for someone else? In the end, she just meowed back. In his mind, the prince thought she really didn't know about her condition, that every time she fell asleep, she transformed into her human form. Smiling to himself, he figured it'd be better to keep that secret for now. Leaving the shop, they returned to the carriage. Seated inside, Silian gave the signal for them to depart. Inside his pocket, the protagonist wondered what that had all been about. As Silian smiled and hummed to himself, it really felt like he was hiding something from her. Suspicious, the kitten decided she couldn't let her guard down. Who knew what was going on inside that prince's head? Then he asked if she wanted some snacks. Her heart instantly melted. Placing a little treat on the cushion with a napkin, Silian watched as the kitten happily munched away. Noticing he was staring, she meowed and wondered if he wanted a bite, or maybe she'd eaten too much. Patting her head, the prince replied he didn't like sweets and told her to finish it. While enjoying the affection, the protagonist suddenly realized something. She needed to stay sharp. At this rate, she'd start acting like a real cat, in both behavior and mindset. Looking out the window, she wondered where they were going. It didn't look like they were headed back to the palace. Then, with a more serious tone, Silian told her to listen. He said that once they arrived at their destination, they were going to check something out. But no matter what happened, she wouldn't get hurt. So, she shouldn't be scared. Her tail fluffed up immediately. That sounded exactly like something someone would say right before doing something sketchy. But then the prince gently stroked her back, and she melted all over again. She thought maybe she was getting too comfortable in his lap. Maybe it was the food. Maybe it was the constant affection. Either way, she was getting sleepy. As she drifted off, a flash of light appeared. And just like before, the woman from earlier was now resting in the prince's lap. This time, she was covered with a sheet, one the prince had thankfully prepared ahead of time. Silian sighed in relief, glad he had grabbed a blanket just in case. He closed the carriage window. He thought about how, ever since the time of the old emperor, magic had been condemned as a dark force and strictly limited. Because of that, sorcerers themselves had faced harsh persecution. So he figured he had to cover up this bizarre little phenomenon. This cat, or woman, or whatever she was. The truth was, Silian still didn't know what to call her. She slept peacefully in his lap as he gently tightened the blanket around her. He thought they needed to meet with the mages in person. The carriage moved toward a distant castle. She slowly started to wake up. The kitten wondered where they were, then heard a voice announcing, "Master of Winston has arrived to greet you." She figured, based on the fact she was once again tucked into the prince's pocket, that she wouldn't really know where they were. But if Silian had hidden her again, they had definitely reached their destination. Turns out they were in the Winston region, in the territory of Duke Delson. A hooded man walked alongside the prince as they strolled through a lush garden, with flowers blooming, decorations all around, and banners flying. Once inside the castle, a white-haired man introduced himself to the prince. He said, "I am Valon Delson." The old man greeted Silian, calling him Your Highness, the son of the Hubard Empire. He said he never imagined he'd get to meet him in person, to which the prince simply nodded. The group of men knelt before him, honoring the future emperor, and asked him to take a seat. A young man named Herod Deucin pulled back his hood and asked, "Forgive me for asking, but may I know why your majesty is here?" Silian looked at him and asked if he really wanted to know. Herod quickly answered yes. Being blunt, Herod explained that sorcerers were heavily marginalized in this region, all because the royal family had labeled them as users of dark forces. So he couldn't exactly connect the dots. He could only guess why someone from the palace, the crown prince no less, would show up in a place like this. With clear resentment in his voice, Herod admitted the whole situation was pretty surprising. Smiling, the prince said he sounded a bit bitter, but Valon quickly cut in, telling the boy, Harid, to shut his mouth, reminding him they were in the presence of His Highness. He apologized to the prince, saying his son was still immature and acted disrespectfully, and begged for mercy. Silian said it didn't matter. Of course, the boy would have resentment toward the palace. but the reason he came here unannounced was simple. He needed confirmation about something. Reaching into his pocket, Silian pulled out the kitten and placed her on the table. Silence filled the room. Everyone stared, completely shocked to see a cat right in front of them. They all asked, stunned, "Is that really a cat? Why would you bring something so grotesque here?" Silian said he didn't care if magic was currently labeled as a dark force by the palace. He would use every tool at his disposal. With a serious expression, he told the sorcerers he wanted them to uncover the curse tied to this cat. That sentence alone shocked the protagonist. She thought, so this guy's name is Herod Deucin. She vaguely remembered him. In the original story, this young and brilliant sorcerer would later lead a rebellion against the prince, who by then was the emperor. In the final arc of the novel, the fact that they were meeting him even before Silian's coronation meant, yeah, the story was definitely going off track now. Everyone still sat around the table, with the prince at the head, staring at the white kitten in front of him. Meanwhile, the girl thought that from now on, she probably wouldn't be able to predict the future properly anymore. Suddenly, Herod snapped, screaming, asking why the hell the prince would bring a cursed creature to this place. Reaching for his sword, Herod shouted that if the palace didn't want blood on its hands, and brought this cat here expecting the sorcerers to handle it, then he'd kill it himself without hesitation. The kitten panicked, but just as Herod's blade neared, a loud crack rang out through the room. Silian stood there with his sword already drawn, the kitten safe in his other arm, and asked, "Who gave you permission to draw your dagger?" Herod's weapon was now shattered on the floor, broken into pieces. His father cried out in shock, but Silian turned to him and coldly said, "You should be more worried about the cat than your son." Herod barked back, saying the prince was surrounded by sorcerers now, and if he thought there wouldn't be consequences for drawing a sword on him, he was sorely mistaken. But he was cut off by his own father, who ordered him to bite his tongue in the presence of his highness. Bowing his head, the man begged forgiveness again, saying his son was too young to understand the gravity of the situation, and asked the prince to lower his sword. Silian did, but then added, "This cat belongs to me, and anyone who comes near what's mine will be punished." Still, he said he'd let it go this time. Shaken, Valon asked, "Do you really mean to say, the cat is yours?" He pointed out that according to prophecy, cats were destined to bring about the fall of the empire. So hearing that from the heir to the throne was a bit much. Meanwhile, the kitten sat quietly on the table, head down. Silian said he didn't like beating around the bush, so he'd get straight to the point. Drawing magical runes around him, fire started flickering in the air. Then he asked, "Should I continue at the speed my fire spreads?" Flames and heat began to fill the room. The sorcerers were clearly rattled. The prince was using his aura. The fire crackled and curled around him, and even the kitten was stunned. This was Silian's aura, the hidden power of the prince. Aura was a type of energy only those who had reached an elite level in swordsmanship could master. Still, in this world, aura was considered a rare and special force, one that resembled magic more than anything else. That's why aura was avoided and rarely seen outside the battlefield. It was considered something incredibly dangerous. And on top of that, in a place full of sorcerers, people historically viewed as enemies of the royal family, the prince using aura openly could reveal a major secret and put him in serious danger. Even so, Silian wasn't holding back. He was blatantly showing off his aura, which made the protagonist wonder, why was he taking this so far? Then the prince asked, "Now that you've seen this, will you or won't you investigate the curse?" Valon bowed and agreed to follow the prince's command, asking him to withdraw his aura. As the man approached the kitten, the girl wondered what was going on. This whole situation had unfolded so differently from the original story. Feeling uneasy, she questioned how she was supposed to survive in this world if she couldn't rely on her knowledge of the plot anymore. As he began inspecting her with magic, Valon suddenly froze, shocked by the energy he was sensing. Stunned, he said he couldn't believe it. Silian asked if he was done. The man nodded, explaining that the power was so immense no one could undo it. It wasn't a curse at all. There was a divine blessing on this cat. The god of this world was protecting her. That got the protagonist curious. Valon went on, explaining that while everyone had believed the prophecy claimed cats were evil entities doomed to die, this one was surrounded by divine protection. And as unbelievable as it sounded, he believed, based on his humble analysis, that this cat and all her ancestors had been divinely protected for generations. Silian rested his hand on his chin, thinking, so, this cat didn't just randomly fall from the sky that day. Valon explained that he felt a strong connection to an ancient protective force. He believed the cat's parents probably had that same blessing, which could mean they were still alive. That would explain how she'd survived for so long. and how she could still exist even though cats were considered extinct. The protagonist leaned forward slightly, curious now about this cat's parents in this world. Then Valon turned to his son and asked him to come closer. He wanted him to scan the cat's memories. Herod scoffed, saying he hadn't learned such a complex spell just to use it on a mere animal. That earned him a quick scolding from his father, who reminded him that he'd taught him all living beings are equal. Grumbling, Herod gave in and apologized to the prince for his behavior. Then he hesitated, asking if he could dare to touch the paw of something that belonged to his highness. Silian looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'll allow it, but only the paw." As Herod reached forward, a flash of light burst out. Closing his eyes, he focused. But then, he frowned and asked aloud, "What the hell is this?" He was seeing the grand palace garden, the majestic castle, familiar scenery, and behind it all was Silian, right at the beginning of the kitten's memories. Opening his eyes, Herod said this was really strange. There was nothing else, just the castle and the prince. Silian asked, "What do you mean nothing else?" Herod replied, "I mean exactly that. The only human in the cat's memories was Silian." He added, "Every single memory is tied to his highness." Silian asked what that meant. The sorcerer explained that it looked like the kitten had lost all of her past memories. The prince was deeply intrigued. Why was he the only person she remembered? He then asked if they had learned anything else about the divine blessing. But the sorcerers told him it was impossible to investigate any further using magic. The divine power inside the cat was blocking any deep magical probing. They'd need to use less conventional methods for further research. Silian nodded and said he'd start investigating curses that went beyond the known prophecy. Valon explained that he believed the original text of the prophecy had been destroyed long ago. But the prince insisted. If they worked together, they could uncover something. Everyone sat around the table. Herod hesitated, then admitted, "I think I get it now. The real reason your highness came here wasn't just about the curse." Silian let out a sigh and agreed. As crown prince, he was here to make an official proposal. He placed a letter with the imperial seal on the table. Opening it, they saw it was a contract. Silian asked them to review it carefully. Shocked, the sorcerers recognized what it was. They saw the sun emblem of the empire stamped on it. They asked why he had chosen them. Silian answered plainly, "The Delsons were the only mage family that never bowed to the royal family. Not even after centuries." He continued, "And I need people who don't lower their heads so easily to the crown. And that's why he needed to make them an offer that would actually benefit them." Valon asked what kind of offer that would be. And while the protagonist kept her eyes on him, the prince responded that he intended to reopen the academy. That line alone instantly shocked both mages, clearly catching them off guard. Silian explained that the former emperor had shut down the academy to eliminate any potential opposition coming from the mage faction. And regardless of that, reviving it now seemed like the best way to form an alliance with the Count's order. The mage warned that doing so might endanger the prince, but Silian quickly replied that he would handle everything himself, and all he asked was for the man to focus on training new mages. He went on to say that, as everyone probably already knew, the Empire was barely holding itself together by the end, and now it seemed like there were secrets hiding in the shadows. Secrets that had something to do with that cat. Silian knew that fixing everything would be difficult, but his mind was already made up. He declared that if they placed their trust in him, he would personally bring back the glory and success that mages once held. Valon then pointed out that, for a mage, a contract meant absolute surrender of their life and power to their master. After all, mages could only unleash their most powerful magic once bonded. But that came at the cost of losing their sense of self, making them completely dependent on whoever they served. Silian answered honestly that he wasn't going to pretend this was about some grand ambition, like building an empire. He simply wanted to uncover the truth, because what they had seen so far completely contradicted the prophecy, and that alone made him curious about the secrets behind all of it. The sorcerer admitted that this definitely wasn't something to take lightly, but after exchanging looks with his son, both gave a nod. Then Valon declared loud and clear that he, Valon Delson, would dedicate his life to whatever his highness commanded. As soon as the words were spoken, magical chains shot out from the paper, sealing the contract. From that moment forward, Silian was officially his master. After 500 years, they were finally welcoming a new master into their household. The prince smiled and commented on how Valon had just called him master, then turned to Herod and said he had a first task for him, something the young mage quickly agreed to, full of anticipation. But what Silian pulled out next caught everyone off guard. He took a pair of pajamas from his bag, leaving the two mages in front of him utterly confused. Herod asked what those were for, and the prince explained that he wanted him to enchant the clothes so they'd automatically adjust to fit whoever wore them. Herod muttered, trying to understand why on earth anyone would need that kind of enchantment. but as soon as he saw Silian's serious face staring him down, he shut up and agreed, visibly nervous. He then stepped into a magic circle drawn on the ground and started casting. After some time, he finally announced that the spell was ready. The clothes would now perfectly fit whoever wore them, regardless of who it was. The prince complimented his work, said that was all for today, and announced it was time to leave. Back at the Imperial Palace in Silian's room, he called the cat over and held up the pajamas, asking her to put them on. She stared at him, completely confused. Weirded out, the protagonist thought to herself, why on earth would a cat need human pajamas to sleep in? That made no sense at all. Shaking her head, she told herself there was no way she was doing that. It looked incredibly uncomfortable. She loved curling up in those soft, fresh sheets without anything on top, and she couldn't believe the prince expected her to give that up. Being stuck in this world inside a cat's body was already depressing enough. No way she'd give up one of the only perks of being a cat, which was sleeping naked without judgment. In her head, she was passionately protesting for animal rights and the freedom to sleep however the hell she wanted. But all Silian saw was her meowing over and over. The prince tilted his head and asked if she really hated it that much, and she let out an annoyed, affirmative meow. Then he asked if she would ever wear them at all, and she gave the same answer, still a very clear no. Smirking, he warned her not to regret it later, which confused her, but she didn't think much of it. Later that night, Silian gently laid a blanket over the silver-haired girl, smiling as he told her, I warned you to put something on. The next day, still in the castle, spring was beginning to bloom. That meant Silian had officially turned 19, and by now, according to the original storyline, he should have already ingested a dangerously high amount of Countess Gisella's black magic potion. Following the plot, around this time he should have started feeling severe exhaustion, overwhelming pain, and begun developing a deeply ominous aura around him. But strangely, the protagonist couldn't help wondering, why did he look so happy and healthy? Meanwhile, Silian sat casually sipping his tea. She questioned whether he might have some kind of secret super regeneration ability she hadn't heard about before, because honestly, he looked great. Placing a small dish of milk on the table, Silian told her to finish drinking it, and she meowed her agreement. Suddenly, a tapping sound hit the window, drawing her attention. She looked up and saw a large bird. It was a white eagle with something tied to its leg. Silian acted like nothing had happened, saying casually that something had just arrived. The protagonist hesitated, wondering if maybe Silian actually knew the eagle. She questioned if things like that were supposed to be normal in fantasy worlds. Opening the window, the bird flew in, and Silian took what was tied to its leg. It turned out to be a letter, which he immediately began reading. Letting out a sigh, the prince said, today really wasn't his lucky day, but at least he had received a letter saying she wouldn't be able to see him. He figured that was better than being left in the dark without an answer. Talking to the bird, Silian said it must be tired and should have some water. The kitten questioned whether eagles were always this obedient. The bird looked directly at her, and she froze, a little freaked out. Moments later, the eagle took off into the sky. Silian said its name was Mikio, and that his mother had given it to him after taming it herself. He also added that the reply needed to be sent back by the end of the day. Now fully alert, the kitten thought that apparently this eagle was the only reliable way to send letters around here. Petting the top of her head, the prince explained he was going to visit His Majesty the Emperor, and that she'd be fine as long as she didn't leave the room, something she agreed to. As he walked toward the Emperor's chambers, Silian recalled the letter he had just read. In it, someone referred to him as their dear son and apologized for canceling their meeting so abruptly. The person explained they had to travel to the region of Tanessa for rehabilitation, but insisted it wasn't anything serious. They called him the son of Rupert, telling him not to worry about his mother and to focus solely on his responsibilities and duties as the future ruler. The letter ended with a prayer to the sun and a signature, Elise, Silian's mother. Outside, the sound of a weapon startled the birds. Near a fallen, bloody lion, several guards stood by. One of them commented that the beast hadn't reacted when whipped, but finally collapsed after being shot. Another man said this was an impressive tribute sent from the continent of Labar. That man was none other than Adolf Reinhardt, Emperor of the Hubard Empire. He casually remarked that it was pretty fun to toy with prey like that. Sitting beside Silian, he began sipping from his teacup. The prince said he had lost his appetite, and that was enough for today. The animal should be taken to rest in the plains. The guards agreed and began dragging the crate containing the lion's body. A guard then approached and greeted them, introducing himself as the chief of staff, Lennon Macmillan, apologizing for interrupting their leisure time. But he insisted he had an important message for His Majesty and needed to request an audience. The Emperor allowed it, and the man leaned in to whisper something in his ear. Turning abruptly, the Emperor angrily said that the sorcerers he found so disgusting were now showing up everywhere, and he demanded an explanation. As Silian calmly sipped his tea, he thought to himself that the palace had finally noticed the mage's movements. He also reflected on Lennon Macmillan, a vile, untrustworthy man who secretly worked for Countess Gisela despite his position as chief of staff. Silian wondered if maybe he'd stirred things up a bit too much. But with a smile, the prince casually said he was the one who summoned the mages. That made Lennon freeze in complete shock. He clearly hadn't expected that answer. The man shouted, demanding to know what in the world the prince was thinking, summoning mages like that. Silian calmly replied that he believed it was necessary to keep them close and observe them. Lennon asked what he meant by observe, and Silian simply said that's exactly what he meant. He explained that aside from the nobles, most citizens relied on mages whenever they were struck with illness or smaller problems. Because of that trust, he wanted to use the mages, those already trusted by the people, to make the palace appear stronger and more loyal in the eyes of the commoners. And he added that he was doing all of this for his father, the Emperor, although that last part was probably a lie. Laughing, the Emperor said the boy was right. Adolf agreed that Silian was doing a fine job supporting his father, finding it absolutely admirable. And he laughed even harder. Then he turned to the chief of staff and asked if he agreed. Clearly terrified, Lennon nodded nervously and said that the love between His Majesty and the prince was deep and sincere. While the Emperor kept laughing, footsteps echoed from the side. A woman approached, asking if there weren't too many guests around today. It was none other than Countess Gisela. Upon arriving, she told the chief to leave, saying she had just come for a pleasant cup of tea, but it was way too loud with so many people around. Nervously, the man agreed and began stepping away. And in Silian's mind, all he thought was that the guy was nothing more than a pathetic loser. The Emperor then asked what brought her there, since he thought the Countess would be busy organizing the masquerade ball. The woman explained that she'd heard a rare black lion was being shown at the greenhouse, so she came to see it. Then she looked around and asked where the lion was. The prince replied that it had been sent to the plains and she was free to go visit it there if she wanted. Either way, the Emperor asked how the preparations for the masquerade were going, and the Countess replied that she was doing her best. She said that if only Her Majesty the Empress were still around, she could have taken care of it herself. That comment clearly annoyed the prince, but the Emperor just laughed, saying what good was someone who was more focused on her rehab than her royal duties. He added that Catherine would be enough on her own. The woman laughed and said he was as heartless as ever. Then she turned to the prince and asked if he thought the same, looking for his opinion. Silian replied that regardless, he had no doubt the Countess would do a great job. But inside he was thinking about how utterly irritating everyone in that palace was. He wondered if he should just kill them all, but quickly shook off the idea. It was still too early. Killing them now would be way too kind. Instead, he'd slowly choke the life out of them, until they begged him to end it. Back in the prince's room, the protagonist noticed someone entering. The door had opened, and she wondered if Silian was already back. She then started hearing some coughing sounds and got up to see what was happening. She saw that Silian seemed to be feeling sick. She wondered if something had happened during the tea gathering, or if Countess Gisela had poisoned the food again. Black magic potion side effects included pain and vomiting, and that food could have easily been laced. She paused for a second, remembering that in the original story, Silian began showing signs of addiction to black magic potions right around when he turned 19. And nervously she realized, that's exactly how old he was now. As she watched, the prince started undressing. She thought to herself this was the point in the story where he should be experiencing his worst pain, the kind of pain that would drive him to kill his own father and take the throne. He wandered around the room silently, ignoring her, with a blank look on his face, then collapsed onto the couch nearby. The protagonist felt sad. It wasn't fair. He was still so young, and yet he had to bear all this pain with no one around to even notice. It wasn't that he was great at hiding it. It's just that no one was close enough to him to care. Nobody at the palace protected him. All this time, Silian had been protecting her while she was vulnerable, but he was only human. He couldn't carry everything alone, so she decided to do whatever she could to help. She grabbed the little dress Silian had bought for her, climbed up using a pillow as a step, and dropped the clothes onto his sweaty head. First, she needed to bring his fever down. She emptied a nearby plate of milk and messed up some clothes. By the end of it all, she was totally exhausted, but she'd finally managed to help, and the fever was going down. She thought to herself how much she wanted to sleep in the big bed again, but realized she'd accidentally knocked down the pillows Silian had stacked so she could climb up. With no way to reach the bed and not many other options left, she slipped into the enchanted outfit they'd made earlier with the mages. Feeling drowsy, she chuckled to herself. Now she was a cat in a dress. If anyone saw her like that, they'd probably laugh their heads off. She kept thinking about Silian, wondering if this counted as a reward for sparing her life. Then, a flash of light filled the room. The next day, with the sun rising, Silian woke up and noticed something on his head. Grabbing it, he realized it was a tiny dress, damp with sweat and water. Standing up, he wondered if, could it really be what he thought? Had the kitten actually taken care of him while he was passed out? Turning to the side, he saw the silver-haired girl, wearing pajamas and sleeping on the floor. Smiling, he figured she must have looked after him until she passed out herself. Kneeling down beside her, he quietly said that apparently she was the only one who supported him in this hellhole. Meanwhile, the girl began to mumble in her sleep. Cradling her in his arms, Silian said she'd catch a cold if she kept sleeping on the floor, and that would force him to take care of her next. He picked her up and placed her gently in bed, then lay down beside her in the end. Brushing her hair, he asked softly if he should reward her for being such a good girl. Then he said a name, Reinhardt, meaning Little Queen. Since, at least inside that room, she acted like a queen giving him orders, that's why the prince decided to give her that name. Little by little, the protagonist began to wake up. Right after that, the prince pinched her nose. Still groggy, she wondered if she was in the bed and how long she'd been asleep. Next to her, the prince asked how she slept, calling her Reinhardt at the end. A bit unsure, she meowed at him, and the young man said that would be her name from now on. She actually got a little excited about it. After all, in this world, she hadn't been given a name yet, and the name Silian had chosen for her was Reinhardt. She suddenly stood up and meowed desperately, trying to ask if he was okay. And somehow he managed to understand her thoughts, replying that he was fine thanks to a certain cat who'd taken care of him. So, as a thank you, he'd given her a name. Putting her paw on her forehead, the protagonist thought she was happy to hear that. Then the prince said that to truly show his gratitude, he wanted to tell her something, which left her totally confused. He said that, to tell the truth, she actually turned into a human while she was sleeping. Shocked, the protagonist was completely speechless. Then he added that in that state, she was also naked. Silence hung in the air as she stared at him, the word naked echoing through her mind. She completely freaked out and started trembling, meowing like crazy. And then finally, the tension snapped. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the room, followed by a loud, screeching meow. Still in the room, Silian called out to her, but she just turned her back and flicked her tail angrily. The prince asked if she was never going to look at him again. And in her mind, she thought, obviously not. He had seen her completely naked, and that upset her a lot. Based on how he described her, she found the whole thing deeply embarrassing. He sighed and reached out his hand toward her, saying he wanted to explain why he hadn't told her before, but all he got in return was a scratch on his hand. He was caught off guard. The protagonist realized she'd messed up. That was just a reflex. She didn't mean to hurt him. He grabbed his coat and said she should rest and try to feel better. He was heading out to work. The cat got a little anxious, wondering if Silian was upset about the scratch. Looking at his hand, Silian thought that, even with his guard up, the most she could do was leave a small mark on his skin. He slid a ring onto his finger and finished getting dressed. The prince said he was heading out and told her to behave and stay quiet. Flicking her tail on the carpet, the protagonist felt a bit restless, wondering when he'd come back. She thought that what just happened was her fault, and she really wanted to apologize when he returned. Suddenly, she heard whispers coming from the door. Then a voice said they needed to find anything that could cause problems. She froze for a second, and the door opened. Terrified, she realized someone was entering the prince's room at that hour without even knocking. Some maids came in, and a woman pointed out that they didn't have much time. Judging by the prince's personality, he wouldn't talk to the Lavern embassy for very long. That woman turned out to be none other than Countess Catherine Harmon Gazella. The protagonist thought, sure, she knew the emperor favored her, but even so, she definitely shouldn't be allowed to enter the prince's room and search for things whenever she felt like it. In the end, the cat hid under the prince's bed. The woman said she'd heard he visited a boutique, so there had to be something related to a woman in there, and they needed to find it. The protagonist wondered what they meant, but then remembered it was the clothing store where they bought the pajamas. The women following the countess seemed a bit hesitant. One of them approached, apologizing and asking the countess why it was even her concern if His Majesty was seeing a woman. She was worried it might backfire if they spoke so openly about it. The countess turned to her and addressed her by name, Lady Anaros, and asked who had given her permission to even think. The woman stood there in shock like a statue. But the countess went on, saying all she needed to do was follow orders. Pressing her fan to the woman's chin, she said she shouldn't waste her time or go against her commands. The woman apologized again, and the countess resumed her mission. Then she asked if the woman really believed the prince was dating a noble. The countess was sure that whoever the crown prince was seeing wasn't from a rich family. After all, if she were an aristocrat, they would have seen her around the palace already. But he met her at a clothing shop, which meant her background didn't allow them to be seen in public together. So Catherine ordered that anything remotely suspicious be brought to her. The women agreed, while the protagonist thought she'd be totally screwed if they found her. They searched for a while, but in the end, the maids reported that they hadn't found anything unusual. That made the Countess furious. She called them useless and cursed them out for not inspecting the room properly. While Gisela ranted about how the woman might as well go blind with such useless eyes, a noise caught their attention. A young maid entered the room and apologized, saying she thought no one was there since the prince was in a meeting with the ambassador. The Countess gave a smug look and asked who she was, if she was the prince's assistant, or maybe sent by him to secretly spy on the Countess. Stammering slightly, the maid said it wasn't anything like that. She'd just come to clean His Highness's room. Trying to give her a lesson, Gisela asked if she thought it was okay to just walk into the prince's room without permission, even just to clean. Almost in tears, the maid explained that the prince told her she could clean whenever the door was left open. But the Countess still didn't believe her and asked if she should rip her tongue out so she'd tell the truth. Meanwhile, the maid just kept trembling with her head bowed. Lady Anna Rose leaned in and whispered to the Countess that the time had come and the prince would be back soon. The Countess said they should leave now, but on her way out, she told the young maid she'd remember her face. With a loud bang, the door slammed shut. The protagonist wondered if they had all already left, but the white-haired maid was still in the room. She slowly approached the bed, step by step, and as she crouched down, the protagonist panicked, afraid of being found and wondering where the woman had even come from. Then suddenly, the maid deliberately looked under the bed, like she knew something was there. Reinette trembled, wondering if she'd been spotted. The maid reached under the bed and started feeling around. Reinette tried to stay as still and quiet as possible, terrified of being discovered. She wondered if the woman knew there was a cat under the bed, but that didn't make sense. They hadn't even made eye contact. Reinette started to suspect this girl wasn't here to clean anything. Realizing the maid's hand was just inches away from touching her, and that she was starting to breathe heavily from the effort. Just as they were about to make contact, the prince walked into the room. Seeing everything, he asked the maid what she was doing. Both of them turned toward him, surprised by his sudden arrival. Annoyed, Silian said he was sure he had closed the door when he left. Lowering her head, the maid replied that the door was already open when she entered. The prince said that was enough and told her to leave immediately. The maid apologized to His Highness and exited. After shutting the door, Silian quickly turned and called out for Reinette. The cat immediately crawled out from under the bed. With a sad little look, she meowed at the prince. Silian scooped her up in his hands and asked if she was okay or if she'd gotten hurt. Clearly pissed, he pointed out that he'd double-checked the lock before leaving, so he was sure Countess Gisela had opened it. Startled, the cat wondered how he knew that. Sighing, the prince said he'd run into her on the way, and she had looked paler than ever. Reinette noticed his hand, still marked from the scratch earlier. She started gently licking the spot. Even after she hurt him, Silian was still protecting her. Suddenly, the prince's ring began to glow. Seeing this, he said someone was contacting him. Looking into Reinette's eyes, he asked if she wanted to learn more about herself. With wide eyes, the protagonist thought about that, while the prince smiled, waiting for her answer. Outside, the young maid started glancing around. Something felt off. She wondered if this garden had always been in the palace, and why it was so eerily quiet. It all seemed strange, like it wasn't the real world. Behind her, a male voice called out. It was Valon Dusen, asking how she'd gotten in there. The maid turned, startled. The man explained he had created that space using magic, and only he and his master could enter it. Valon said it was obvious the girl had been looking for something. The maid quickly tried to cover it up, saying it wasn't true. She just got lost and ended up there. The Duke didn't buy it for a second and asked bluntly if she'd been looking for a cat. Her expression froze instantly. The girl immediately began to justify herself, saying she had no idea what that man was talking about. But the fact that she had started trembling gave away her lie. Valon warned her that it would be better to tell the truth, since his master didn't like wasting time with roundabout conversations. Behind her, arms crossed, Silian was staring at her. She hesitated for a moment, then bowed her head and greeted the prince. Silian immediately recognized her. She was the maid who had rummaged through his room earlier. The prince asked for her name. She replied that her name was Irina. He guessed she hadn't found what she was looking for in his room. The maid insisted again that she was only there to clean. Silian took a breath and sharply said she was just wasting their time with another obvious lie. Getting close to her face, he whispered angrily, demanding she answer quickly. Who was she working for? Faced with a death stare that could win a staring contest against a basilisk, the maid started sweating. She kept swearing she wasn't a spy and couldn't tell them anything. The prince told her she clearly hadn't understood that this wasn't a polite request. It was an order. The woman screamed that she didn't work for anyone. Reinette, watching, wondered what she should do. Silian was getting more and more furious. The woman begged them to believe her, but her words fell on deaf ears. The protagonist realized she had to act, or the prince would kill this maid. Seeing that there was no use dragging this out, the prince began to draw his sword. Realizing what he was about to do, Reinhardt couldn't let him become a heartless tyrant. At that exact moment, she jumped from his pocket and clumsily clung to the sword. Surprised, Silian froze. Even Valan was speechless. Gripping the sheath, the cat felt proud that she had managed to stop him. When asked why she did that, the only thought in her mind was, because he was trying to kill someone. Duke Valan Dusin couldn't believe his eyes. His Highness had brought a cat with him? He asked what would have happened if she had been caught. The prince simply replied that he believed the party of interest should be present too. Irina froze in disbelief at what she was seeing. The cat looked at her, hesitant. She didn't seem like someone who was afraid of cats, even if this was possibly her first time seeing that particular animal. The girl suddenly ran toward the cat, trying to snatch her from the prince's hands. Valan barely had time to shout a warning. Seeing the maid's hands coming at her, Reinhardt thought she was about to be kidnapped. But then, with tears streaming down her face, Irina cried out that she was alive, calling the cat, "My baby." In the past, the maid had left the cat in the garden, telling her that if anyone walked by, she should hide. And if someone tried to grab her, she should run. She asked her to be a good girl and behave until she came back from work. That night, after her shift, the girl returned. But the cat wasn't in the garden anymore. She panicked, since the cat used to run straight to her when called. She was consumed by fear and worry. She searched everywhere, but still, her baby was gone. Hearing all this, the prince finally understood what had happened when he found Reinhardt and took her in. It now made sense that she had been in the garden. Tears were still rolling down Irina's cheeks. She had believed she'd lost her baby forever, but she never could have imagined that Reinhardt had lost her memories and had been with Silian all that time. The maid hugged the cat tightly, squeezing her so much it was hard to breathe. She was scared the baby must have been terrified from the memory loss. Irina was overwhelmed with joy that their lives had been spared. She didn't even know how to thank His Highness. Silian said that since the girl was Reinhardt's mother, that made her a cat too, which meant she could thank him by answering some questions. The maid agreed without hesitation. Meanwhile, Valan was confused by that logic, still trying to connect the dots between the girl and the cat. The prince asked if there were any other cats besides the two of them, but Irina said no, that wasn't the case. After the prophecy was announced, cats started being hunted. Even mages had come after them. At that time, all the other cats had been killed. Silian asked if she meant the prophecy that said cats would bring about the end of the world. Irina explained that after one case claimed cats were killing children and sacrificing them to a demon, they were branded as demonic creatures. Hearing that, Reinhardt hoped this was all just a story. But still, she felt a deep sadness and guilt. She didn't know why, but something about it felt familiar. This grief, this guilt. She couldn't tell who those feelings belonged to, but she felt them swelling in her chest. Turning his attention back to Reinhardt, Silian asked if she was okay, or if something was wrong. The maid then asked the prince if he had named the cat Reinhardt himself. He quickly confirmed, but now that they had discovered the cat had a mother, he became quite curious. What was her real name? But Irina admitted she had never given her one. When asked why, she explained, while holding her daughter tightly, that it was because they had been cursed. Silian was deeply surprised and asked her to tell him more. Irina said the primary effect of the curse was that they turned into cats, and on the night of the red moon, they would become pregnant and give birth to a child. That was the punishment they were forced to bear. Pressed further about the punishment, Irina admitted she didn't know all the details. Valan stepped in, explaining that the red moon only appeared once every 70 years. The last one had happened 18 years ago, in the year 511 of the imperial calendar. Irina confirmed that 10 months later, she gave birth to a child, and now she was 89 years old. The protagonist was completely shocked. How could she be that age and still look so young? But once the initial shock passed, it hit her. She wouldn't age either. And one day, she'd also become pregnant under the red moon. Irina explained that her child would reach full maturity in a year, which also meant she had just about that much time left on this earth. Their kind was born as human children and grew the same way. But once they reached the age of 20, they stopped aging and remained that way for the rest of their lives, until the moment they turned 90. Silian now understood their life cycle, but he still didn't see why that meant Reinhardt hadn't been named yet. Irina said something unexpected had happened. When Silian asked what she meant, the maid explained. Normally, they appeared human while awake and only turned into cats when they fell asleep. But this child had a different curse. Reinhardt was completely stunned. She didn't understand why she was different from the others. Surprised, Silian finally understood the problem. why her curse worked in reverse. Because of that, Irina had wanted to name her only after solving the issue, but she had found no answers, and couldn't bring herself to name her daughter just yet. Silian said nothing like this had ever happened before, and the maid agreed. He asked if she had any leads or thoughts. Irina explained she hadn't found anything, but believed there might be one place where the information they needed was kept. The prince asked where. Trying to speak, it was obvious Irina was extremely nervous. After all, she had just revealed both her and her daughter's secret to the Prince of the Empire. Reinhardt placed a paw on her hand, showing she trusted her and stood by her side. Holding her daughter's paw, Irina turned to His Highness and asked him to take her to the Imperial Archives. For a moment, Silian didn't understand the request. Irina clarified that yes, she knew entry was forbidden, but it was the most likely place they could find even the smallest piece of information. Both were silent for a few seconds. Turning to Valan, Silian asked if he could teleport them there, startling Irina. Valan replied that it was possible, but he was worried they'd be caught. Silian promised he would handle that part himself. Smiling, Irina felt deeply grateful to His Highness, but the prince told her there was no reason to thank him. He was doing this to uncover the truth for himself. Still, he asked the maid what her plan was. She didn't understand what he meant. Silian then brought up Reinette. Now that the cat had reunited with her family, did this mean she would have to say goodbye to the prince? Irina said she had one request for His Highness. She wanted the cat to stay with Silian until they reached the Imperial Archives. The prince asked why. She explained that as just a servant, it would be very hard for her to hide her baby, calling her by the name Reinette as well. The woman was convinced her daughter would be safer with the prince, just as she had been all this time. Reaching out his hand, Silian gently picked up the cat, promising to take care of her for the night. He then gave instructions. They would go to the Imperial Archives the following morning, asking Valan if it would be difficult. The mage said it really wasn't. Bowing, Irina said she had no idea how she could ever repay all the help she was receiving from the prince. Silian, confused, asked why she was crying. Reinette wondered, was he really okay with letting her go so easily? That night, after carefully scanning every corner of Silian's room, the cat thought, this might be the last time I ever see this place. Or him. Hearing the click of a door, she turned around. When he stepped out of the shower, the young man noticed the cat was still awake and asked if she had been waiting for him. Seeing his bare torso beneath the robe, Reinette immediately blushed. She quickly tried, with all her body language, to tell him to cover up. Silian didn't quite get it, confused at first, then laughed as he watched her. Leaning closer, he smiled and asked if she wanted to sleep with him that night. Reinette froze, not understanding his intentions. He laughed again and clarified, of course she could wear her pajamas, which only made her more embarrassed. That night, just like before, Reinette lay beside the prince, resting on a pillow next to him. She couldn't sleep for a long time, her eyes fixed on him. Eventually, Silian noticed and asked if she was asleep, startling her. In a panic, she pretended to be asleep, curling up and staying quiet. But the prince reminded her that she turned human when she slept, so it was pretty obvious she was still awake. Something that completely caught her off guard. How could she forget something so important? Silian sighed softly, then admitted that ever since she started sharing his bed, his nightmares had stopped. Gently stroking her fur, he whispered that even though it was a little late to say it, he was truly happy to have her. She gave him a soft kiss on the tip of his nose. She felt the same way, but since she couldn't speak, that kiss would have to be enough. As both of them enjoyed each other's quiet presence, she silently thanked him for staying by her side. In her human form, she was now sleeping in his arms. But even in her dreams, one thought lingered. She didn't want to part ways with him. The next morning, Silian, now dressed in a more formal outfit, stood with his arms crossed, annoyed that Valan was late. The mage apologized, explaining he had to sneak past the guards, then asked if Silian hadn't brought the cat with him. A little paw peeked out. Reinette waved at them. Valan questioned why hide her if no one else was around. Looking down, Silian said it was just because she was shy. So shy she'd tremble from embarrassment even in his pocket. Her mind, however, was still stuck on last night, still trying to process what the hell had just happened. Silian covered his face with his hand while she squirmed in his pocket. Getting the hint, he assured her that he wouldn't say anything to the others. Irina arrived last, apologizing for the delay. Finally, the group was complete and ready to go. Turning to them, Silian warned, this wouldn't be an easy trip. And in the blink of an eye, they teleported to the Imperial Archives. Silian was stunned by how weak the security was in a place that housed the Imperial family's secrets. Herod explained that there were a lot of magical blind spots and weaknesses in the palace's defenses. That comment made the prince uneasy, but he said it was something he'd make sure to fix once he became emperor. He ordered everyone to look for anything related to cats, and so they began their search. While digging through the shelves, Herod remarked that although the palace's defenses were weak, they'd done a pretty good job hiding documents. Silian snapped back at him, irritated, telling him not to insult the Empire. When asked, Valon said he hadn't sensed any magical tomes so far, so their only option was to keep looking and try harder. Crawling out of Silian's pocket, Reinhardt was stunned by the massive sea of books and shelves. She thought it would take forever to examine everything. Irina spotted her daughter and asked if she had found anything. Sadly, Reinhardt meowed a quiet, no. Irina clutched a heavy tome about prayers from the great empire of Hubard. Valon suddenly told them to wait. He could feel a strange energy radiating from the book. Silian didn't think the contents seemed particularly special, but as he read further, he realized it might actually be a prophecy. It spoke of someone who had stolen precious souls, who would spend 8 days in darkness and welcome the 9th night. The maid suddenly gasped. This was the exact prophecy she'd heard years ago. Her mother once told her she was the 8th child, and if this was the prophecy she thought it was, then the 9th child was none other than her own little Reinhardt. The cat couldn't believe it. Was she really the 9th child of prophecy? She decided to double-check the text. Maybe she had missed something important. Suddenly, the book began to glow as a radiant beam of light burst out from it. When she touched it, Reinhardt heard a voice. As if being pulled into the book's very essence. The voice asked, "Can you hear me, child?" She was inside the book. Someone had sealed their power within it, hoping to tell their story to the child of the 9th night. Someday. If they were talking about the future, the cat figured, this was probably a message from the past. Turns out, Reinhardt's arrival in this world had been foretold. She was the one destined to save the Empire. Those words felt strange, though, since according to the prophecy, cats were supposed to be destroying the Empire, not saving it. Not to mention, her curse was different from all the other cats. But the voice said that was the proof. Reinhardt was the 9th child. In that strange book space, she was asked to find the true prophecy, the one that had been damaged. Floating through the void, she felt completely lost. She didn't know who was speaking or where she was supposed to look for this prophecy. The voice explained that Reinhardt was protected by divine blessing and had the power to fix everything. It wished for her to find the original manuscript, break the chains of her curse, and end the suffering. It also said, if she ever met her descendant, she had to help them see the future. And just like that, the voice bid her farewell and wished her luck. Multiple voices echoed faintly in the distance. Just static. Impossible to understand. But slowly, Reinhardt began to return to her senses. She woke up to the prince shouting her name, eyes still drowsy. He was overjoyed that she was okay. She had been unconscious for a long time. Valon chimed in, saying that both she and His Highness had blacked out at the same time. Now that she was awake, Silian said it was time to explain everything. In the background, the Duke and his son whispered to each other. Herod said someone had poured their entire magical power into a book. Only high-ranking archpriests could ever dream of pulling that off. And judging by everything they were saying, the name started to sound familiar. Silian and Reinhardt looked at each other, wide-eyed. Then the prince asked the big question, who could it be? Someone explained that the original scroll of the prophecy had been damaged a week after it was created. The priest who died protecting it was a man named Fabian Nellis. It would make sense then. He was likely the one who left that final message. Reinhardt thought that must have been the man who reached out to her inside the book. Silian suddenly stood tall. He had made a decision. When asked, he declared it. They would find the descendant of Fabian Nellis, no matter where he was, no matter who he was. They'd find him, no matter what. A carriage rolled down the road. It had been 5 days since that declaration. Thanks to Valon, they had located the boy pretty quickly. They were almost there. Still, Reinhardt didn't look happy. From her expression, Silian could tell something was bothering her, and he asked what it was. She was extremely uncomfortable. Silian had put bunny ears on her, and apparently that was supposed to disguise her tail too. The prince didn't see a problem. She was a cat, and it was dangerous for her to be outside. So he said it made perfect sense for her to pretend to be his pet bunny. He asked her what she thought, but Reinhardt could only tremble in shame. This was, without a doubt, the most humiliating moment of her life. She tried to meow in protest, but that only made Silian laugh harder. He thought she was absolutely hilarious. When they arrived at their destination, Silian was taken aback. They said the descendant of Fabian was 16 years old, but the place reeked of alcohol, and rats were running around. Valon confirmed. This was the right spot. As soon as Herod opened the door, they saw someone tossing a boy into a corner. The boy yelled, demanding the money he was promised. His attacker just laughed and told him to get lost. Silian was stunned. That boy? That was Fabian Nellis's descendant? Herod confirmed it. He was the only living one. His name was Sanua Nellis. Meanwhile, the boy and the drunk man kept yelling at each other. But just as the drunk was about to punch him, smack, a loud sound echoed through the room. Blinking, Manhwa had no idea what just happened. The prince had stepped in, gripping the man's head as he held him down on the floor. He told the boy he'd give the drunk 100 gold coins. Then, looking down at the man, Silian added, "If 10 coins gave you the right to punch someone, then for 100 I should be allowed to break your neck." He tossed the man aside and warned, if he ever hit anyone again, he'd be searching for his own head rolling on the floor. Later that day, they took Manhwa out of that filthy place and got him a proper meal. The kid was clearly starving. Silian told him to slow down, gently calling him Manhwa Nellis. But the boy looked up, confused. "Who the heck is that? Just call me Jack, for God's sake." Silian raised an eyebrow. "So that's the name you gave yourself?" "Yep," the boy replied. "Jack." From inside Silian's pocket, Reinhardt peeked out, still wondering if this guy could really be the descendant of a legendary archmage. Once his stomach was full, Jack finally asked, "So, what do you all want with me anyway?" After all, they had helped him and even fed him, but Jack never made deals without giving something in return. That's why he told the prince he was at his disposal, as long as Silian told him what he wanted. Still silent, Silian gestured to Herod. Herod stepped forward and asked the boy if he knew anything about a child whose day and night were reversed. Jack just stared blankly, completely confused by the question. The room fell into awkward silence. They started asking if he had any family relic, some special story passed down from his parents. But Jack knew nothing. Looking defeated, Herod told His Highness that this guy clearly had no clue. Silian rose from the table and said it was time to leave. He ordered Herod to erase Jack's memories and told Valon to go search for another descendant of Nellis. Jack was stunned. He asked what was going on. As they walked out, Silian told him he'd make sure Jack got paid enough to live comfortably. After all, his family had made sacrifices for the Empire, even producing a great priest once. Jack snapped. He said he didn't want that kind of money. He repeated that he only accepted honest deals. And who the hell gave them the right to erase his memories anyway? From Silian's pocket, Reinhardt asked if it was safe to assume that if this guy didn't inherit anything, then they had no leads left. Jack cut in, saying he never got anything from his family, not even a name. He'd left all of that behind. That gave Reinhardt an idea. What if the thing passed down by Nellis wasn't a relic or a story? What if it was the family itself? Suddenly it clicked. She had a plan. With a swift leap, Reinhardt jumped out of Silian's pocket. Jack screamed. "What the hell? Was that a bunny or a cat?" Tearing off the bunny ears mid-sprint, Reinhardt launched herself at the boy and bit him. Hard, right on the cheek. She needed his blood. The blood of the Nellis bloodline. Jack let out a scream loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. Then, everything shifted. Reinhardt felt her perspective change. Silver strands of long hair slipped through her fingers. Jack looked up and froze, the bite mark still fresh on his cheek. In front of him wasn't a cat anymore. It was a girl. Both of them stood frozen, in total shock. Reinhardt was still on top of him. And right on cue, the overprotective prince swooped in. Silian yanked Reinhardt away by the waist and told her not to get too close to that guy. He tossed his jacket over her, covering her body. Jack just kept shouting in disbelief. A cat turned into a person? This isn't real. How is everyone so calm? Reinhardt felt a bit spooked. This guy was way too loud and way too close. Herod stepped up behind Jack and silenced him. Valon turned to Reinhardt and asked how she even guessed that would work. Beaming, she explained, "There's one thing that can't be stolen, broken, or lost with time. People, the bloodline itself." Valon nodded, saying the high priest Nellis must have passed down the key through his distant descendant. Finally, Jack realized what had happened. The cat had turned human, thanks to him. He smugly demanded a proper reward for that. The mages immediately told him to shut up. Off to the side, Silian quietly watched Reinhardt in her human form. She turned to him and asked why Harid and Jack were in the other room. The prince said it was because of the noise they were making. Now it was just the two of them, sitting at a table with cups of tea. Silian casually asked why she'd bitten Jack on the cheek. Scratching her own cheek, she replied that, well, it was just the first thing she saw at the time, referring to him as Your Highness. Silian sipped his tea and asked why she was being so formal all of a sudden. Blushing, Reinhardt admitted that in her human form, she felt she had to act according to her class, since he was the crown prince. Murmuring under his breath, Silian was about to say something about class systems, but before he could respond, someone started yelling. They both jumped in surprise. Reinhardt stood up, thinking the voice was loud enough to mean something was very wrong. She stepped barefoot across the floor, but before she could take another step, Silian stopped her. He scooped her up into his arms. Flustered, she asked him to put her down. He gently told her to stay still, reminding her that she was barefoot. Now, why she couldn't walk barefoot and had to be carried by the prince, we may never know. A second later, Herod burst into the room with tears in his eyes, begging His Highness to save him. Jack said he didn't understand why the mage was making such a fuss over a simple rat. Herod cried that he'd rather dive into a pigsty than end up in the same place as that miserable man. Annoyed, Jack pointed out that Herod always talked like that whenever he got scared of a tiny rat. Suddenly, the rat started moving in sync. The boy shouted to forget the pigsty. He'd throw him into a rat hole instead. Renette wondered if Jack was actually making the rodents behave like that. The rats swarmed Harriet, who collapsed in defeat as his father called out his name. The room was a complete mess, like a horde of rats had stormed through it. They said it took forever to chase them all out, but Jack added that the other guy was the one who started it. Renette thought that, if her hunch was right, then Sanua's descendant might actually have the ability to control animals. With that in mind, she suggested they take him with them. Touching his hand, she told him Swana had a special ability, prompting Jack to complain about being called that name again. Staring at them both, Silian asked Renette if Swana could really control rats. Jack again asked them to please stop using that weird name. Renette asked if he knew about his family lineage. She explained that the Swanas had produced powerful priests for generations and had made great sacrifices for the Empire. She whispered to Jack that he had been born into that family. Jack replied that he wasn't the one who did any of that. Still, Renette suspected Jack might have even greater powers and asked if he wasn't at least curious to learn more about what he could do. Jack was even more surprised when he heard that he was the only one who could help her. She added that he could also help other people. Silence lingered for a moment. A little embarrassed, Jack simply asked that if he turned out to be useless, Renette wouldn't take back her words. Taking his hand, she nodded, thanked him, and said she wouldn't. Just as Jack was about to complain about being called Swana again, he noticed something. Renette's vision was starting to blur, like the ground was shaking. She saw Sanua's face getting bigger and bigger. Clinging to the boy's hand so she wouldn't fall, she wondered if she had turned back into a cat. Speaking with Valan, the mage and Silian both agreed. Of course she was a cat. The prince asked the mage why she had changed back. Valan said he had a theory. He suggested it could be due to the sudden drain on Sanua's energy. Grabbing the boy's shirt with just his fingertips like he was disgusted, Harriet called him ungrateful. Silian commented that they'd now have to wait until the boy recovered his strength to check again. Duke Valan agreed. There wasn't much else they could do for now. Meanwhile, the two teens were glaring at each other in the background like stubborn children. The prince said the best plan was to leave Sanua at the Dusan estate and asked to be notified once the boy regained his strength. For now, he and Reinette would return to the palace. Back at the imperial estate, Irina saw the prince's carriage through the window and wondered if they had managed to solve the curse or not. Another maid approached, calling her by name. Irina turned around, surprised. The woman said she was being summoned to the reception room. A little hesitant, she explained that Countess Gisela was the one calling her. Hearing that, Irina froze in fear, wondering why the Countess wanted to see her. Silian was already pissed off by the whole situation, but he had more matters to handle when he returned. He asked the cat how she was feeling. Renette tried to say she was fine, but the moment she took off her dress and flopped onto the bed, it was clear she was completely drained. Stroking her head, the prince told her he'd be back soon, but for now, she could rest. Irina knocked on the bedroom door, and the prince told her to come in. She apologized for the sudden appearance, but said she had something to report. Silian and the cat looked over at her. In another room, Silian was fuming. He couldn't believe the Countess had approached Irina and tried to force her to spy on him. Taking off his glasses, he left the room. Closing the door behind him, Silian muttered that now he couldn't trust anyone in the palace anymore. The place was exhausting. Walking down the hall, he thought to himself, actually, there was still one person he could trust. When he got to the room, he noticed how unusually quiet it was. His face grew serious. Then, out of nowhere, he heard a meow. Renette immediately ran toward him, clearly overjoyed by his return. A soft smile appeared on his face. Silian gently picked the cat up in his arms and suggested they go take a walk together. That night, they went out together into the garden. The prince asked if the cat was enjoying herself, and Renette let out a satisfied meow, clearly loving the walk. The trees bathed in silver blue moonlight, and the lake shimmering under the moon made a beautiful sight in her eyes. That cool but gentle landscape reminded her of Silian. Sitting on the grass, the prince said he had something for her. He handed her an envelope. The young man explained that it was a letter from Irina, her mother. With a hint of sadness in his voice, the prince said she had already left and didn't get the chance to say goodbye in person, so she asked him to give her daughter this letter. He added that the maid had been worried about Renette the entire trip. Looking at Silian, Renette thought he was probably thinking about his own mother's letter too. He looked pretty sad. She placed her paws on him like she was trying to comfort him. With a small smile, the prince said she always knew how to calm him down. He figured the reason he stopped having nightmares must have been because of her ability. But Reinette, looking skeptical, thought that was probably not it. As nice as it sounded, she doubted she'd gained such powers out of nowhere. The young man went quiet for a second, and to her surprise, Silian started taking off his shirt. Reinette instantly covered her eyes with her paws, but the prince asked her to look. Timidly, Reinette started to open her eyes. He said he wanted her to see it for herself. To her shock, all of the scars on his body were gone. He could have just shown her the scar on his hand disappearing. But no, he probably just wanted to mess with her a little by taking off his shirt. Smirking, the prince teased her, saying if she stared any harder, she might burn a hole in him, making her blush even more. Anyway, he explained that he'd started noticing this odd change ever since he began sleeping next to her. More specifically, since they began spending more time together. She was taken aback. It was just a theory, he admitted. Maybe it was all just coincidence. But even if it wasn't, Silian said Reinette was still special to him. She felt so happy hearing that. She didn't know why, but it was just so comforting to hear. Even if she were just an ordinary person, she could tell she would still be someone special to him. Back at the palace, Silian was greeted by the butler. The prince asked what they wanted from him so late at night. A bit nervous, the staff handed him a box of cookies. With arms crossed and a skeptical look, the young man said the servants claimed the cookies had been sent by Countess Gisela. Reinette flinched at the name and immediately backed away from the sweets. She used her entire body to express that he definitely should need them. And so, Silian started to suspect there really might be something sketchy going on. The cat knew perfectly well. If anyone was going to poison cookies, it would be Countess Gisela. The prince stood in silence for a moment. Then he called for Reinette, who raised a paw in response. He asked if she remembered what he'd said earlier about his theory regarding her special ability. The cat meowed, clearly doubting he could really do something like that. But reaching for the cookies, he said he'd decided to try just one, to test his theory. After taking a bite, he said he'd find out soon whether or not he'd have nightmares that night. Reinette was horrified by what she considered a Nobel Prize-winning level of recklessness. As he licked his fingers, Silian smiled at her. In her mind, Reinette was losing it. Why on earth would he eat that? Later that night, the prince was lying in bed, still asleep. Touching his forehead, Reinette was relieved